Welcome to the webinar, The Inner Family Systems and Our Health. I'm Anna Hausen, the creator of Hashimoto Help Initiative. Hashimoto Help Initiative facilitates early detection of Hashimoto thyroiditis and brings it to remission via evidence-based e-health services. Dr. Richard Schwartz is the founder of Internal Family Systems. He is a featured speaker for many international psychotherapy organizations and a fellow of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. He serves on the editorial boards of several professional journals. He published several books as Internal Family System Therapy, Meta Frameworks, The Mosaic Mind, The Family Therapy Concepts and Methods, and You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. I'm so glad to have Richard Schwartz today with us. Welcome, Richard.
I was saying, I'm trained as a family therapist. My PhD is in that. And I was part of the big revolution that family therapy tried to bring to psychotherapy, where we tried to see people and their problems in context of their families and tried to reorganize family relationships. And I had some success doing that, and then decided, this was in the early 1980s, to try to prove how effective it was. And we gathered together a group of bulimic kids and their families and did what at the time was called structural strategic family therapy. And I found that I could reorganize the families just the way the book said to do it, and yet many of my clients didn't change. They kept binging and purging. So out of frustration, I began asking them, what's going on inside of you that's causing this? And they started talking about these different parts of them. And they would say things like, well, something bad happens in my life, it triggers this critic who starts calling me names. And then that'll bring up a part that makes me feel totally alone and empty and worthless. And that feeling is so dreadful that almost to the rescue comes the binge part and takes me out of my body and makes me unfeeling. But the act of the binge brings back the critic, who now is calling me a pig on top of all the other names. And that brings back that empty, young, worthless feeling, that part. And so it sounded to me like what I'd been studying in families, like a little system of interacting people almost. And so I began to get curious about it. And I was lucky because I had a couple clients that were very articulate about their parts. And so I let them teach me about all these interrelationships. And then I started to apply some family therapy ideas and techniques to trying to change all that inside. And so that's why I call it internal family systems, because it seems that everybody has a inner family of these, what I call parts. Other people call them different things, but they're like little sub-personalities that in a healthy system all get along and are in valuable roles, but are forced out of their naturally valuable roles by traumas and by attachment injuries into roles that sometimes are quite destructive and sometimes can lead to medical problems, which I understand is your interest. So that's a real brief history. And the upshot of the model is that everybody has parts. They're not created by trauma. They're not pathological per se. It's the natural state of the mind to be multiple that way. But they are forced out of their naturally valuable states into extreme roles by things that happen to us in our lives and by what I call the burdens that they take on. And the definition of a burden is an extreme belief or emotion that comes into us from our experience, or sometimes we inherit them, we call legacy burdens. and attached to these parts. And once they're attached to the part, they organize the way the part operates or sees the world, almost like a virus. And so a lot of the healing involves unloading these extreme beliefs and emotions that we got from the past. Mm-hmm. So, and then the other big discovery, for lack of a better word, is that as I began helping people try to get to know these parts, I would ask them to separate from the part and kind of look at it rather than be so blended with it. And as people would separate, more and more they would enter spontaneously a state that's now being called mindfulness, where they didn't feel all those extreme feelings anymore. They had a kind of clarity and actually started to feel spontaneously compassion for the part that they were getting to know, rather than hating it or fighting it. And when I would ask them about that part, they would say, well, that's not a part like these others. That's more me. That's more who I am. So I came to call that the self with a capital S. And so the biggest discovery in IFS is that this self exists just beneath the surface of all these parts and can be accessed if they open space. And this self has not been damaged and has all these wonderful, what I call C-word qualities, like curiosity, compassion, calm, confidence, courage, creativity, connectedness. I think I missed one. There are 8 of them. And that before we have people work with their parts, I'll have them access that place, which again, is very similar to what people are calling mindfulness. But with traditional mindfulness, people just separate and then observe their parts. They don't really interact with them. So what I'm trying to do is help people separate from these parts, get into this state where they have tremendous compassion for the parts, or at least curiosity toward them, and begin to get to know them. And when you do that, they begin to transform. So that's the model in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you. It resembles for me a lot the immune system also. I'm very interested about our autoimmune disease and how immune system, but you know, our body will have so many checkups on the immune level. And even though sometimes the mistakes are happening, even though that we have so much on the immune level checkups to protective checkups. And it seems like the same, what you're describing a little bit happens in having a sort of a protector, exiles, and self.
Yeah.
And the self is something that's you are saying it's basically there in every one of us.
Yeah.
As accessible to all of us.
Yes. And often much more quickly than people have thought. Yeah.
What makes it difficult sometimes really to get in touch with it?
Yeah. So, as I was saying, most people carry these burdens, and those include beliefs that I'm worthless or that I have to, the world isn't safe or things like that. And so their parts are looking outside. They don't look inside. They don't know about this self by and large. And they often think they have to protect the person, even though they don't, because of what's happened in the past when self didn't protect them. They're like parentified children in a family where the parent didn't protect the kids had to protect the parent. Mm-hmm. So when you have a trauma when you're young, there are parts that think they have to thereafter protect you in your life. And they tend to lock away the parts that were hurt by those traumas, which is what we call exile parts. So systems tend to develop where all the parts that have been traumatized or hurt by bad parenting or carry the burdens of pain or fear or shame, we tend to try and lock up inside in a kind of inner basement or a cavern. And then other parts are forced into these protective roles because now we have to contain all those exiles. And those protectors don't know about self, and they think they have to run the whole system. So that's partly why
Mm,
we don't, live this way. We don't live from this place I call self.
yeah. And how we can recognize that we're not, when we're stepping out of self and we're stepping in. Do you have certain?
So as you start to get to know your parts and you get to know yourself, then it's very easy to tell, oh, this is a part of me. This isn't self. It doesn't have those C-word qualities right now. And you get a kind of intuitive feel for a lot of our trainings are designed to help people access a lot of self and then really get a deep felt sense for what that feels like to be in that place, and then notice their parts and how that changes them physiologically in addition to all the thoughts that come and the different emotions. So a lot of this is based on sensing in your body what you're feeling and how extreme it is. And then if there's anything extreme, by definition, that's a part. And then you ask that to open space and let you come back more into your body. Because traumas have the effect of pushing self out of the body and filling it with these burdened parts. And so as they open space, you come back more into your body. So it's become a fairly body-centric kind of model.
Mm-hmm.
And with autoimmune kinds of things, our big outcome study was with rheumatoid arthritis, for example. It's published in the Journal of Rheumatology. And the profile of the most common client, these were mainly Irish Catholic. It was done in Boston, so there are a lot of Irish Catholic women who had never been in therapy before. And so by simply having them focus on the pain itself and try to get in self relative to the pain. So how you do that is, I would say, just focus on the pain. Tell me how you feel toward it. And of course, immediately they'd say, I hate it, or it's crippling me, I want to get rid of it. We would say, well, give us a chance to just get to know it a little bit. So the parts of you that hate it, let's just see if they would relax a little bit for a little while inside and separate. And most people could do that. Sometimes we had to work with, excuse me, I think something flew into my mouth. Sometimes we had to work with those parts a little bit before they'd step back. But at some point, we could get a client in answering the question, how do you feel toward the pain, to say, well, I'm just kind of curious about it. And from, again, mindfulness. And from that place, I would say, okay, ask the pain what it wants you to know about itself. And they would hear answers from the parts that were using the pain for their purposes. And the most common answer was that the pain was being used to try and cripple them because the part that using it hated the caretaking part that made them only take care of everybody else and never take care of themselves. And so either this would cripple them so they couldn't do that, or it would try to get attention from the parts that wanted them to have some power in their lives and to take better care of themselves. And so as we got that, we would negotiate with the parts causing the pain to let us go to the big caretaking part, have them find that in their bodies and get to know it and negotiate with it some time sharing with parts that want them to assert themselves. And just that, depolarizing, that big polarization inside, people started to get a lot better.
Yeah.
And then as we would work with them, we would ask, because each of them are trying to protect in different ways sometimes, these exiles. So the idea of the exile would come into the conversation with these parts, and we would negotiate permission to go to those exiles that were often stuck in dreadful places in their past, of sometimes sex abuse, sometimes just neglect from being in families with too many kids and so on. And so they would start seeing these little girls, these little younger versions of themselves. And we would have them open to those young parts and listen to their story, what we call witnessing, witness what happened and how bad it was in the past. And then you can actually have a client go into those scenes in their childhood and be with the little girl in the way she needed somebody, and then ultimately take her to a safe place, process we call retrieval. And as we did that, these parts were willing to give up all the pain they carry. And then we'd come back to the caretaking protector and also the pain-causing assertive one who wants to assert themselves. And they would be a lot less polarized and a lot more relaxed because they didn't have to protect those exiles anymore. And so the arthritis would get even better to the point where we had clients go into total remission, and most of these clients started out in pretty bad shape.
Yeah, great.
So that's a long story in answering your question about autoimmune stuff. That what I find over and over is if you simply have a patient focus on their symptom and get them in a mindful place toward it, what I call self-led place, and ask it some questions, most of the time the answers will reveal a protective part that's using that symptom to try and get attention or try and do something else inside the client. And then you begin the negotiations. So, a lot of our parts, when they can't get access to us, they have a limited number of ways to try and get our attention. One of them is through the body. I don't know if you saw the movie Inside Out.
Yes.
So it's like they have this control panel in there.
Yeah.
And if they need to, they can push the button to give you a migraine headache. Mm-hmm. Or they can shift towards some autoimmune. It's the body attacking itself. It's a part attacking you. Some kind of autoimmune thing, or something like that. And often they don't even know the damage they're doing by doing that. They're often quite young, these parts. So that's a lot of how.
Also the protectors? What? Also the protectors?
Protectors too are often, they're like I said, parentified children. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're teenagers, sometimes they're a little bit older than the exiles, but generally they're like a bunch of kids. It's like Lord of the Flies in there, Nobody knows what to do, and they're trying their best. And this isn't to say that all symptoms are caused by parts, and because there are things like viruses or genetic defects that you're going to manifest those no matter what your parts do, no matter how healthy you are.
Yeah.
But this is more speaking to chronic conditions that aren't responding to treatment, and what you'll find is parts know about those genetic defects often. And so that's the control panel they've got. So I have a genetic defect for migraine headache and for asthma. And if a part wants to take me out sometime, it can push that button. And also I'll have an asthma attack if I'm around a lot of dust or something like that has nothing to do with my parts. So I'm not taking the position that some people take that all of your illness is caused by emotions. It's not. But that often there are parts involved in some of these things, and it doesn't hurt to check anyway.
Yeah, of course. And anyway, the symptoms can be released. I think that's this, at least we see it very often. You can have a better quality of life by taking care of your psyche also.
Yeah.
And how it comes, you just mentioned that indeed you are calling that these protectors are very often very young. Is this a reason why? Because your premise is that the protectors and all the exiles, they all have a good intention.
Yes. Yeah.
How it comes that this can lead to health issues, or is this really a shouting, like getting our attention, or?
Yeah. A lot of time it's just trying to get your attention. Sometimes, as I said earlier, it's trying to screw up your life or to counter some other part. But it's there's always a positive intention. That's been quite amazing.
Mm.
So I've used this model now with sex offenders, with, people that have done heinous things. And as I can get them to get curious about the parts that were involved in those things, they'll often find that there's a positive, ultimately protective intention behind the things that they were doing, and that they carry these burdens they got from their perpetrator that forced them to do these terrible things. And so we can unburden those parts too. So basic message is this is sort of self-compassion, but it's very specific and practical. You are compassionate for these specific inner entities that need your compassion, and often are the parts of you that you've hated all your life, or you've demonized, or other people have hated or demonized. And so my message, which I tried to convince the Dalai Lama of recently when I was talking to him, is it doesn't help us to further say there are these destructive emotions that we need to fight. We instead need to go to them initially with curiosity, ultimately with compassion, just like we do to our external enemies. That's his message about how to go to external enemies. I'm saying, why not do the same thing with these inner enemies? So, and finding the big payoff is that you, like you said, your quality of life improves, and what illnesses you have usually get a lot better.
Yeah. And you are stating also that your method can be used for self-help. And how you would advise people if they want just to try it themselves and they don't use a professional help, so where to start and what steps to follow, or probably to give them an idea which book or leaflet they can use? What would be your advice?
Yeah, so in terms of books, if they were to go to our website, which is selfleadership.org, there's an introduction to IFS there. There's a book called You're the One You've Been Waiting For.
Yeah.
And there's a book called A Part of Me. And from all of that, they'll kind of get the conceptual model, and there are some exercises in those. There's another book called Self-Therapy by a guy named Jay Early that is more instructive about how to do this by yourself that they might want to look at. And in general, how we do it is, and I this has become a practice of mine. I'll wake up in the morning, I'll notice what parts of me are up, and you just notice because what kind of emotions, what we call trailheads, the emotion or the agitated thought or the congestion in your body or the achiness somewhere is usually a part. So I'll scan my body and my mind, notice what parts are there, and then get into a place of curiosity about them, focus on them, actually find them in my body. So most any part, if you were to focus on, say you have a obsessive belief, you could actually find the place in your body where that seemed to be broadcasting from. And then you use that as a focal point as you do this work. And then I would just ask, is there something you want me to know? I see you're kind of upset. Is there something you want me to know? And then wait for the answer to come, because many people have these thinking parts that are automatically going to try and figure out what it is. So I'm going to ask all that to step back. So I'm just focusing on the sensation or the thought or the emotion and asking what it wants me to know and waiting for an answer to come back to me. And if I'm patient enough, invariably an answer comes that often surprises me. And then I can say, okay, I really appreciate you telling me that. And then based on that answer, I might change something in my outside life, or I might have to go work with some other parts that this one's polarized with, or work with parts that it protects. But I'm gonna, talk to it more about that. Now, all of that with protectors can very easily be done with many people and safely done on your own. So self-help that way. when it comes to getting permission from these protectors to go to the exiles they protect, most people need to have somebody there helping them. I do myself. So we advise people not to try that on their own so much. So when it comes to doing the self-help part of it, you can do a lot on your own, and then you might need somebody to help you with a little bit of it.
Yeah, and I think what you just mentioned is, I've seen it's quite important that you really differentiate, and from the beginning it may seem like a sort of club full of people, you know, where you have to ask them to step aside, and that you let to know the parts separately. And
Yeah.
yeah. So
now, Anna, you've been doing this on your own, am I right?
I've been doing myself, but I ask for help on the later stage.
You did ask for help at the later stage.
What you said, this is also my experience. There is a moment where you see that you're struggling yourself. You need someone from outside to help you. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And let me see what I thought. Yeah, as you said, I'm also not claiming that we are solving now autoimmunity. With my intention with these webinars has been to show that psyche has a lot also to do with autoimmunity. I'm not stating that this is the only one or this is like a cure, really, but I've seen a lot of, let's say, remission coming when people step in and look not just on the triggers like food and allergies, but also psychological allergies, and you know so this is more also my message. It's not like claiming pure cure. And how does protectors and exiles and self are interacting, that people can get some idea? Is this can you are we reaching in our daily life, are we operating from the exiles form, or are our behavior is more driven from the protectors?
Well, what we call managers, which are one class of protectors. There are two basic classes of protectors.
Yeah.
And the managers are the ones that most people are running most people's lives, at least at the surface. And they're focused on managing the external world so they don't get triggered. And by triggered, I mean so that their exiles don't get re-injured. So they're often very preemptive, and they're watching for danger, and they're hypervigilant, and they're thinking all the time. They're these cognitive parts of us. And they're trying to control the outside world so we don't get triggered. And they're also trying to control how much we feel emotionally. So they can numb our bodies and do a lot to our bodies to make us feel less. And then the exiles are what people have called the unconscious often. So they have a big influence, but it's not a conscious influence. It's sort of a, when you see somebody, you have this big rush of elation, and you think it's your soulmate. That's one of these young exiles usually thinking, oh, there's my savior who's going to take care of me. But you don't actually know that that's happening. It's because you've locked away that part. Or if you suddenly get terrified by something, you can't figure out why. It's usually one of these young parts you've locked away that has an influence and may make you withdraw very quickly in what seems to you an irrational way. But you're just not aware of that as a part. So both managers and exiles can have a lot of influence in your daily life. And then there's another class of protector that when something happens that does trigger your exiles, it's like a big emergency because the whole system is afraid of that affect. It's afraid of being flooded by the pain or shame or terror. And so there are other parts who do something to get you out of that immediately. So they're often very impulsive and reactive, we call them firefighters because they're trying to fight the fire of emotion, the flames of emotion when an exile has been triggered. And so some illnesses are related to that. So if my migraine headache comes immediately after I've done something that has triggered me, then oh, okay, there you go. All right, you don't really have to give me a migraine headache. I'm not a little boy anymore. So some firefighter activity is somatic and is done, and then some symptoms are manager-based. So some symptoms are manager-based, some symptoms are firefighter-based. And manager-based symptoms are those often that are trying to keep you from doing things, maybe, or are trying to get attention from somebody so that they'll take care of you and in a chronic way. So they're attempts to manipulate the outside world somatically. And then again, firefighters are much more reactive somatic reactions to being very triggered, being very upset.
Yeah.
So we work with each kind in different ways.
And you are talking about the self-critic also as a protector in your system, isn't it?
Yeah, the self-critic is a manager. It's a kind of manager. There's different kinds. So some of these critics are trying to tear down your confidence so you don't take risks. And sometimes they'll use illness to do that.
Yeah.
And then other critics are actually trying to make you feel so bad that you're going to work harder and be perfectionistic so that you do a good job and everybody likes you. You see the distinction? Yeah. And so those don't tend to use somatic strategies quite as much. So, but they're both in the class we call managers because they're trying to manage your appearance and your body and your performance and try to manipulate relationships so that you don't get hurt anymore.
But what if this self-critic is hiding a shame? You know,
is hiding shame?
Yeah, it's like protecting to show the exile that is suffering from shame.
Yeah, a lot of them are there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have a big exile that carries a lot of shame, usually you'll have a critic who's using that shame to keep you small or to make you hide or something like that.
Yeah.
So you don't get any more shame. Yeah. And so we tend to mistake these critics as enemies, but they're really just trying to keep us safe. And often you can quickly get them to turn around if they'll give you permission to go and heal the exile and unload all the shame it carries.
Yeah.
And then the firefighter comes in when that shame-filled exile gets triggered. It's so horrible to feel any of that this other part does something very extreme to get you out of that, like go get drunk or do something. But usually the extreme activity brings on more shame, both from the critic and also from the outside world, because you've done something that's extreme that people don't like.
Yeah.
So that becomes a vicious cycle where the more shame you get, the more need there is for this extreme behavior. And then the more shame comes from that, so then there's more need for this extreme behavior. So many addicts, many offenders of various kinds, many people that feel out of control are in that loop. And shame is at the base of a lot of it.
Yeah. And you are stating that actually we know that we dealt with an exile at the moment the protector would step aside. It's nice. You really know that you took good care of the exile. At that moment, the protector would just step
aside. So after we've healed an exile, we bring the protectors in to see that they don't need to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And they're what's also magical is that they're often interested in doing some valuable role that's exactly the opposite of what they've been doing. So the protector that had to make you small now wants to help you get out there.
Yeah.
And the one who was so perfectionistic wants to help you relax more, and so on and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this part of your theory, and also what I've seen, this switch of roles and taking another, intuitively knowing what is the other role that they can take in our psyche.
Yeah. And it goes along with my presumption that they all were valuable when they were born. So they're all valuable qualities that get distorted by traumas and attachment injuries. And so they already know what they're designed to do, usually. So once you say, what would you like to do now? There's usually a pretty rapid answer.
Yeah.
And then we just help set that up in there.
Yeah.
So ultimately, people stop doing IFS. They no longer have protectors. They don't have exiles. All their parts are kind of getting along and helping them in different ways. And they have access to things that they had cut off from. So not only when you heal an exile, do you no longer have that pain, but now you have access to all of its precious joy and spontaneity and creativity that you had cut off before. Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you once again, and keep in touch.
I will, you too. It's delightful. Thank you.